The November wind cut through downtown like a blade, carrying the bitter promise of winter's first real storm. Leaves swirled across the empty parking lot behind Murphy's auto shop, with the smell of motor oil mixed with the sharp scent of coming snow. Most folks had already headed home, windows glowing warm against the growing darkness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But in the shadows behind the dumpster, a small figure huddled against the cold brick wall. 10-year-old Marcus Thompson pulled his torn jacket tighter around his thin frame, his breath coming out in small puffs of white. He'd been on his own for 3 weeks now, ever since the last foster home decided they couldn't handle him anymore. The truth was simpler and sadder than that. Marcus wasn't a troublemaker. He was just a kid who'd learned not to trust too easily, not to hope too much, because every time he did, he found himself packing his few belongings into a garbage bag and moving on to the next temporary place that would never really be home. His stomach had stopped growling hours ago, replaced by a hollow ache that made him dizzy. The cardboard sign beside him, written in careful child's handwriting with a broken crayon he'd found, read simply, "I'll work for food, sir. Please." Most people had walked past without a glance. A few had hurried by faster, clutching their purses or pulling their children closer. Marcus had learned not to expect much from adults. They always disappointed you in the end. That's when the rumble started. Deep, powerful, growing louder like thunder rolling across the valley. Around the corner came a lone motorcycle, its engine growling low and steady. The bike was a classic Harley-Davidson, chrome gleaming even in the dim streetlight, ridden by a man who looked like he'd seen every mile of hard road America had to offer. This was Thomas "Tank" Rodriguez, president of the Iron Brotherhood MC. At 52, Tank carried the weight of leadership in his broad shoulders and the wisdom of hard lessons in the lines around his dark eyes. His leather vest bore patches that told stories of loyalty, loss, and brotherhood forged in fire. The club's colors stretched across his back, but it was the smaller patch over his heart that meant the most to him. A simple memorial patch with Miguel, "Forever my son," stitched in faded gold thread. Tank had lost his own boy 15 years ago. Miguel had been 8 when leukemia took him, and Tank's world had crumbled. His marriage didn't survive the grief. He'd thrown himself into the brotherhood, into the road, into anything that could dull the constant ache of a father's broken heart. Tank had been riding these streets for over 20 years, and he knew every corner, every shadow. But tonight, something was different. As he slowed to park his bike outside Murphy's shop, where he was supposed to meet Diesel about fixing his brother's carburetor, movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. A child, alone, in the cold. Tank killed the engine and sat still for a moment, his weathered hands still gripping the handlebars. The kid couldn't be more than 10, maybe 11. Too young to be out here by himself. Too small to be dealing with whatever had put him in this alley. Slowly, Tank swung his leg over the bike and walked toward the shadows. His boots crunched on the scattered gravel, and the boy looked up with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "Evening, son," Tank said quietly, his voice gentle despite its rough edges. He kept his distance, knowing how his size and appearance might frighten a child. Marcus pulled his knees closer to his chest, ready to run if he needed to. The man was huge, covered in leather and patches, with arms like tree trunks and scars across his knuckles. Everything Marcus had been taught about strangers screamed at him to be afraid. But something in the man's eyes stopped him. They weren't cold or angry. They were sad. Kind, but sad. "I'm not doing anything wrong, sir," Marcus whispered, his voice shaky from cold and fear. "I'll move if you want. I'm just trying to earn some food." Tank's heart clenched in his chest. The kid's voice, the way he held himself, the resignation already weighing down those thin shoulders. It reminded him too much of Miguel in those final weeks. Not the sickness, but the vulnerability. The quiet bravery of a child, trying to be strong when the world was too big and too hard. "What's your name, son?" Tank asked, crouching down to make himself less intimidating. Marcus. The boy replied after a moment's hesitation. Marcus Thompson. Well, Marcus Thompson, I'm Tank. And you don't need to move anywhere. Tank glanced at the cardboard sign, his jaw tightening. How long you been out here? Marcus shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Just today. But I can work. I'm good at cleaning and organizing, and I don't eat much. The words hit Tank like a physical blow. This child was negotiating the terms of his own survival with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it before. When's the last time you had a real meal? Tank asked. Marcus thought about it, his young face scrunched in concentration. Tuesday, I think. Mrs. Patterson made spaghetti before I had to leave. Today was Friday. Tank felt something dark and protective rising in his chest. Marcus, where are your parents? Don't have any, Marcus said simply. Never really did. Been in foster care since I was little, but they said there's no room anywhere right now. Social worker said she'd find me something after the weekend. But, he trailed off, shrugging again. After the weekend? Tank's voice carried a dangerous edge that made Marcus look up sharply. They left you on the street for a weekend? It's okay, Marcus said quickly, recognizing the anger in the man's tone and worried he'd gotten someone in trouble. I'm tough. I can take care of myself. Tank had to turn away for a moment, his hands clenching into fists. In his world, in the Brotherhood, there were codes, sacred rules, and the most sacred of all was protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, especially children. Marcus, Tank said, his voice carefully controlled. Do you trust me? The boy studied Tank's face for a long moment. Everything in his experience told him not to trust anyone, especially not a stranger who looked like he could break someone in half without trying. But there was something about this man's eyes, something about the way he'd crouched down to Marcus's level, something about the gentle way he said Marcus's name. I guess, Marcus whispered. Good, because I'm going to make sure you get fed tonight. Real food, hot food, and then we're going to figure out what to do next. Sound fair? Marcus nodded slowly, not quite believing it but desperate enough to hope. Tank stood and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. Diesel? Yeah, it's Tank. Listen, I need you to meet me at Rosie's Diner instead of Murphy's. No, everything's fine. Just bring Cookie and Hammer if they're around. And Diesel? We're going to need to make some calls tonight. If you believe in the power of brotherhood, in protecting those who can't protect themselves, and that sometimes guardian angels wear leather and ride steel horses, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more true stories of hope and humanity to the world. Tank hung up and looked down at Marcus, who was watching him with wide, cautious eyes. Ever been to Rosie's Diner? Tank asked. Marcus shook his head. Well, you're in for a treat. Rosie makes the best chicken and dumplings this side of heaven. An apple pie that'll make you forget all about being cold and hungry. As Tank gently helped Marcus to his feet, the boy's legs nearly buckled. He was weaker than he'd let on, running on nothing but stubbornness and desperation. Easy there, son, Tank said, steadying him with one massive hand. When's the last time you had water? Marcus couldn't remember. Tank's jaw tightened again. He guided Marcus to his bike and pulled a bottle of water from his saddlebag. Drink this. Slow sips. As Marcus drank, Tank called another number. Rosie? It's Tank. I'm bringing someone special to dinner tonight. A young man who needs our help. Yeah, I know it's almost closing time. That's why I'm calling you first. Rosie Martinez had been feeding bikers and truckers and lost souls for 30 years. She'd known Tank since he was barely older than Marcus, back when Tank was angry at the world and looking for a fight. She'd fed him then, too, when he had nothing but pride and a broken heart. Bring him on over, Mijo, Rosie said without hesitation. I'll keep the grill hot. 20 minutes later, Tank's Harley rumbled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, with Marcus holding tight to Tank's waist. The boy had never been on a motorcycle before, and despite everything, he couldn't help but feel a tiny thrill at the power of the machine beneath them. Rosie's was a beacon of warm yellow light in the growing darkness. Through the windows, Marcus could see checkered tablecloths and people laughing over coffee and pie. It looked like the kind of place he'd only seen in movies, the kind of place where families went and everyone knew each other's names. Scared? Tank asked as he killed the engine. A little, Marcus admitted. That's okay. Being scared means you're being smart. But you're safe now, I promise. Tank meant it. In the Brotherhood, a man's word was everything. And Tank had just given his word to a 10-year-old boy who had no reason to trust anyone. The bell above the door chimed as they walked in, and every head in the place turned. Marcus instinctively moved closer to Tank, overwhelmed by the attention. But instead of the suspicious stares he expected, he saw curious but kind faces. A trucker at the counter nodded at Tank and smiled at Marcus. An elderly couple waved from their booth. Tank Rodriguez, Rosie called from behind the counter, her voice warm and welcoming. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and hands that had comfort built into them. And who's this handsome young man? Rosie, I'd like you to meet Marcus. Marcus, this is Rosie. She's the best cook in 3 states and has been keeping me fed and out of trouble for more years than either of us wants to admit. Marcus managed a shy wave, still staying close to Tank's side. Well, Marcus, any friend of Tank's is family here, Rosie said with a smile that could melt ice. You hungry, baby? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Good. You boys take that corner booth, and I'll bring you something that'll stick to your ribs. As they slid into the worn vinyl booth, Marcus couldn't help but stare around in wonder. The walls were covered with photos, truckers, bikers, families, all smiling with Rosie in various combinations. It was like a gallery of people who'd found warmth in this little diner. She feeds a lot of folks who need feeding, Tank said, following Marcus's gaze. Never asks questions, never judges. Just make sure nobody leaves hungry. Rosie appeared at their table with 2 glasses of milk and a plate of fresh dinner rolls. Start with these while I get the real food ready, she said, ruffling Marcus's hair gently. Marcus had intended to eat slowly, to be polite. But the moment the warm bread hit his tongue, his body took over. He ate with the desperate efficiency of someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. Tank watched quietly, his heart breaking a little more with each bite. This wasn't just hunger. This was survival. This boy had been living on scraps and hope for who knew how long. Easy, son, Tank said gently. There's plenty more coming, and it's not going anywhere. Marcus slowed down, embarrassed. Sorry. I know I'm eating like an animal. You're eating like someone who's hungry, Tank corrected. Nothing wrong with that, but I don't want you getting sick. 15 minutes later, Rosie returned with 2 plates piled high with chicken and dumplings, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread that was still steaming. Marcus's eyes went wide. All of this? For me? All of it, Tank confirmed. And there's apple pie waiting when you're done. As Marcus ate, slower this time, savoring each bite, Tank found himself studying the boy's face. There was intelligence there and resilience, but also a deep weariness that no child should carry. Marcus had the look of someone who'd learned not to expect good things, because disappointment hurt less than hope. Marcus, Tank said carefully, tell me about these foster homes. How many have you been in? Marcus thought while he chewed. 7, I think. Maybe 8. Some were okay. Some, he shrugged. Mrs. Patterson was nice. She tried to teach me to cook. But her husband lost his job, and they couldn't afford to keep me anymore. And the social worker? She really just dropped you off and said come back Monday? Marcus nodded. Miss Henderson. She said the system is overwhelmed, and there just aren't enough families. She gave me $20 and said to be careful and find somewhere warm to sleep. Tank's hands tightened around his coffee mug. $20. To a 10-year-old. In November. She gave you her card, though, right? A way to reach her if you needed help? Marcus shook his head. She said the office is closed weekends except for emergencies. And a kid on the street isn't an emergency? Tank's voice was getting that dangerous edge again. I guess not, Marcus said softly. That's when the rumble started again. But this time, it wasn't just one bike. It was 3, then 5, then more. The sound of Harleys filled the parking lot as Tank's brothers began arriving. Marcus looked up nervously as the first group walked through the door. Diesel, Cookie, and Hammer. 3 men who looked like they could bench press pickup trucks and had probably done worse things than Marcus could imagine. But Tank noticed something that Marcus couldn't see yet. The way Diesel's eyes softened when he saw the boy. The way Cookie automatically lowered his voice and moved more carefully. The way Hammer hung back, recognizing that his size and scars might be frightening. These were men who'd seen the worst the world had to offer. They'd been in fights, been to prison, been written off by society. But they were also men who understood loyalty, who protected each other, and who had a code that ran deeper than the law. "Boys," Tank said as they approached the table, "I'd like you to meet Marcus." "Marcus, these are some of my brothers from the club." Diesel, a tall man with arms covered in tattoos and a graying goatee, extended his hand carefully. "Pleased to meet you, Marcus. Tank called us because we heard you might need some help." Marcus shook hands with each of them, surprised by how gentle their grips were despite the obvious strength in their hands. "Tank, Cookie said quietly, pulling him aside. Cookie was the club's treasurer, a detail-oriented man who'd been an accountant before he found the Brotherhood. "I made some calls on the way over. That social worker, Miss Henderson, she's got 17 cases and hasn't returned calls in 3 days. The County Children's Services is backed up 6 weeks for emergency placements." "6 weeks?" Tank's voice was barely controlled. "Gets worse," Hammer added. He was the quiet one, the one who listened and remembered everything. "Talked to a buddy who worked security at the county building. Word is, they're about to cut funding again. Fewer caseworkers, fewer foster families getting support. Kids like Marcus are falling through the cracks faster than they can catch them." Tank looked back at Marcus, who was carefully eating his pie and pretending not to listen to their conversation. But Tank could see the tension in the boy's shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the door like he was calculating escape routes. "Tank," Diesel said quietly, "we all know what this is about. We all know why this one matters to you." Tank didn't deny it. Miguel would have been 23 now if he'd lived. But there were moments, looking at Marcus, when Tank could see the boy his son might have been. "Maybe," Tank said, "but that doesn't change what's right. This kid needs help, and the system has failed him. That makes it our problem." "Agreed," Cookie said immediately. "What do you need?" Tank looked around the table at his brothers. These weren't perfect men. They'd all made mistakes, all paid prices for their choices. But when it mattered, when someone needed protection, they stood together. "First, he needs somewhere warm to sleep tonight. Tomorrow, we figure out the long term. He can stay at my place," Diesel offered immediately. "Got a spare room, and Sarah's always saying the house is too quiet." Tank shook his head. "Appreciate it, brother, but that's not how this works. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Legal. Above board. I don't want anyone questioning our motives or giving this boy more trauma." "So what are you thinking?" Hammer asked. Tank was quiet for a moment, watching Marcus carefully scrape the last bits of apple filling from his plate. "I'm thinking maybe it's time I stopped running from what happened to Miguel and started honoring his memory the right way." The table went silent. They all knew Tank's story, knew the pain he carried. But they also knew that look in his eyes, the way his voice changed when he made a decision that couldn't be unmade. "You sure about this?" Cookie asked. Tank looked at Marcus again. The boy had finished his pie and was sitting quietly, hands folded in his lap, waiting to be told what would happen next, expecting to be disappointed again. "More sure than I've been about anything in 15 years, Tank said. Tank slid back into the booth next to Marcus, while his brothers took seats at nearby tables, giving them space but staying close enough to help. "Marcus," Tank said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded. "If you could have anything in the world right now, what would it be?" Marcus thought about it seriously, his young face scrunched in concentration. "A home," he said finally. "Not just a place to sleep, but a real home. With someone who wanted me there. Someone who wouldn't get tired of me or change their mind." Tank felt his throat tighten. That's a good answer. An honest answer. What about you? Marcus asked. What would you want? Tank was surprised by the question. Adults didn't usually ask Tank what he wanted. They were too intimidated or too focused on what they needed from him. You know what? Tank said slowly. I think I want the same thing. A real home. A real family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus looked confused. But you're grown up. Can't you just make your own home? It's more complicated than that, Tank said. Home isn't just a place. It's people. It's belonging somewhere with someone. I had that once with my son. When he died, I forgot how to make a home. Your son died. Marcus's voice was soft with sympathy. Yeah, his name was Miguel. He was 8. That's really sad. I bet he was a good kid. The best, Tank said, his voice rough. Smart like you. Brave like you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who understood loss in different ways. Marcus, Tank said finally, what if I told you that I know someone who might want to help? Someone who could give you that home you're looking for. Marcus's guard went up immediately. Who? Me. Marcus stared at him. You? I'm not saying it would be easy, Tank said carefully. I'm not saying I know how to be a dad anymore. But I've got a house with empty rooms, and I've got a heart that's been empty too long. Maybe we could help each other figure out what home looks like. Marcus was quiet for a long time, his young mind working through the implications. You mean like adoption? Eventually, maybe, if that's what we both wanted. But first, we'd have to do it right. Foster care, visits with social workers, making sure you're safe and I'm capable. It could take months, maybe years. And what if you change your mind? What if you decide I'm too much trouble? The question hit Tank like a punch to the gut. This child had been abandoned so many times that he was already preparing for the next disappointment. Marcus, look at me, Tank said, his voice serious. I can't promise you that everything will be perfect. I can't promise I'll always know what to do or say the right things. But I can promise you this. I will never, ever give up on you. Once you're my family forever. That's what brotherhood means. Even if I mess up, even if I'm difficult, especially then, that's when family matters most. Marcus studied Tank's face, looking for signs of deception or false promises. But all he saw was sincerity and a pain that matched his own. Okay, Marcus whispered. I'd like to try. Tank felt something shift in his chest, like a door that had been locked for 15 years finally opening. Good. Now here's what we're going to do. Tonight, we're going to get you a motel room. Clean, warm, safe. Tomorrow, we're going to call Miss Henderson and tell her you're not lost anymore. Then we're going to start the process of making this official. A motel room? Marcus looked worried. I don't have money for that. I do. And more importantly, we do. Tank gestured to his brothers, who were watching from nearby tables. That's what brotherhood means, son. When one of us needs help, all of us step up. Diesel approached the table with a gentle smile. Marcus, I just got off the phone with the Hampton Inn down the road. They've got a nice room ready for you, with cable TV and everything. Cookie's going to take you over there and get you settled while Tank and I make some calls. But I don't have clothes or a toothbrush or anything, Marcus said. Already handled, Hammers said, appearing with several shopping bags. Walmart run. Got you some clothes, toiletries, and a few other things. Wasn't sure what size, so I got a couple options. Marcus looked overwhelmed. Why are you all helping me? You don't even know me. Because that's what we do, Cookie said simply. We take care of our own. And Tank's claimed you, which makes you our own too. Besides, Diesel added with a grin, Tank told us you're looking for work. Brotherhood's always got jobs that need doing. You any good with a wrench? Marcus shook his head. Well, you will be. Can't be a proper brother without knowing your way around an engine. An hour later, Marcus sat on the edge of a real bed in a warm, clean room, wearing new pajamas that actually fit and holding a new toothbrush. Cookie had helped him check in, shown him how to work the TV and the heater, and made sure he had the phone numbers for Tank, the front desk, and emergency services. Tank will be by first thing in the morning, Cookie said. And if you need anything, anything at all, you call one of these numbers. Don't try to tough it out alone anymore. Those days are over. After Cookie left, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing himself. When was the last time he'd been this clean? When was the last time he'd felt this safe? He thought about Tank's promise, that he'd never give up on him. Adults had made promises before. They'd all been broken eventually. But something about Tank felt different. Maybe it was the way he talked about his son, the pain in his eyes that matched Marcus's own. Or maybe it was the way his friends, his brothers, had rallied around without question. Marcus had never seen anything like it. Adults who actually looked out for each other, who kept their word, who showed up when they said they would. His phone, his first phone ever, another gift from the Brotherhood, buzzed with a text from Tank. Sleep well, son. Tomorrow's going to be a good day. For the first time in months, Marcus actually believed it might be. Meanwhile, across town, Tank sat in the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse with a dozen of his closest brothers. Phones spread across the table, making calls and working connections. Got a lawyer, Diesel announced. Sarah's cousin handles family law. She says she'll take the case pro bono if Tank's serious about this. Financial situation? Cookie asked, flipping through paperwork. Clean as a whistle. Tank's got steady income from the garage. Owns his house outright. No criminal record since he was 18. On paper, he's actually a perfect foster parent candidate. Background check? Already started. Should have results by Monday. Tank listened to his brother's work, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for himself, but for Marcus. For the family they might become. Tank, Hammer said quietly, you know this is going to change everything, right? Your life, your freedom, your priorities, everything. Tank thought about Miguel. About the 15 years he'd spent running from the pain of losing him. About the empty house and the lonely nights and the way he'd closed his heart off from anything that might hurt him again. Good, he said finally. It's time for a change. Saturday morning dawned cold but clear. Marcus woke up in an actual bed, under clean sheets, after the first full night's sleep he'd had in weeks. For a moment, he'd forgotten where he was, and panic had started to set in. Then he saw the shopping bags from the night before, smelled the lingering scent of soap from his shower, and remembered Tank, the diner, the promise. A knock at the door made him jump, but when he looked through the peephole, he saw Tank's familiar face. Marcus opened the door with a smile, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. Morning, son, Tank said, carrying a bag from McDonald's. Thought you might be hungry. Over breakfast, Tank explained the plan. First stop is the police station. We need to file a report about your situation. Make sure everyone knows you're safe and accounted for. Then we're going to visit Miss Henderson and start the paperwork. What if she says no? What if the system won't let you help me? Tank's expression grew serious. Marcus, I've spent my whole adult life fighting systems that don't work the way they should. I'm not about to let this one beat us. We're going to do everything legal and proper, but we're also going to be persistent. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say. The police station visit went better than expected. The desk sergeant knew Tank from various community events the Brotherhood had participated in: toy drives, charity rides, disaster relief. When Tank explained the situation, the sergeant made some calls, and within an hour, they had temporary emergency custody arranged, with a formal hearing scheduled for the following Friday. You know, the sergeant said as they prepared to leave, the city could use more folks like you, Tank. Takes a special person to step up like this. Tank looked down at Marcus, who was holding his hand without realizing it. Not special, just doing what needs doing. By Sunday evening, word had spread through the 20-mile Brotherhood network. Brothers from 3 states had heard about Marcus and Tank's situation. The clubhouse phone hadn't stopped ringing with offers of help, support, and resources. Tank, Cookie said, hanging up from another call. You're not going to believe this. Remember Righteous Rick from the Phoenix chapter? His wife runs a program that helps bikers navigate the foster care system. She's driving up here tomorrow to help with the paperwork. In Memphis, Mike says his brother's a family court judge, Diesel added. Not in this county, but he knows people. He's making calls. Tank was overwhelmed by the response. He'd always known the Brotherhood was strong, but seeing them rally around Marcus, a boy most of them had never met, reminded him why he devoted his life to these men. There's more, Hammer said with a rare smile. The word's gotten out to some of the other clubs too. The Road Warriors, the Steel Horses, even some of the Christian Riders. They're all offering to Gray. Write character references, provide financial support if needed, whatever it takes. Why? Marcus asked quietly. He'd been sitting in the corner, overwhelmed by all the activity on his behalf. Why do they all care about me? Tank knelt down in front of Marcus's chair. Because that's what we do, son. We protect family, and your family now. But more than that, every one of these men knows what it's like to be written off by society. They know what it's like to be judged by appearances instead of actions. They're not going to let that happen to you. Plus, Cookie added with a grin, Tank's been like a grumpy old bear for 15 years. It's nice to see him happy again. Marcus looked at Tank with surprise. I make you happy? Tank felt his throat tighten. Happier than I've been in a very long time. Friday morning arrived with a cold rain that drummed against the courthouse windows. Marcus sat in the hallway wearing his first real suit. Another gift from the Brotherhood, the Seven, holding Tank's hand and trying not to be nervous. The hallway was full of bikers, dozens of them, all cleaned up in their best clothes, all there to support Tank and Marcus. Some had driven hundreds of miles just to be there. Remember, Tank said quietly, just tell the truth. Tell them how you feel, what you want. The judge just wants to make sure you're safe and happy. What if I say something wrong? There's nothing you could say that would be wrong. You're a good kid, Marcus. Just be yourself. When they were called into the courtroom, Marcus was amazed to see even more people there. Sarah, Diesel's wife, who'd driven up from Phoenix. Several foster families who'd volunteered to provide references. Dr. Matthews, a child psychologist who'd evaluated Marcus and declared him remarkably resilient and emotionally healthy given his circumstances. Judge Martinez, no relation to Rosie, but just as kind, listened carefully as the social worker presented the case. Miss Henderson, who had finally returned everyone's calls, admitted that the system had failed Marcus but recommended Tank's petition be approved. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge said, you understand that foster care is a significant responsibility? That this young man has specific needs given his background? Yes, Your Honor, Tank replied. I've taken parenting classes, completed all the required certifications, and assembled a strong support network. I'm committed to providing Marcus with stability, love, and every opportunity to succeed. And Marcus, the judge said, turning to the boy, how do you feel about living with Mr. Rodriguez? Marcus stood up, his voice clear despite his nervousness. Your Honor, Tank saved me, not just from being cold and hungry, but from giving up. He's teaching me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love someone and never giving up on them. I want to be his son, and I want him to be my dad. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Petition approved, Judge Martinez said with a smile. Temporary custody is granted to Mr. Rodriguez, with a review hearing in 6 months to assess progress toward permanent placement. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Marcus found himself swept up in a hug from Tank that lifted him off his feet. Welcome to the family, son, Tank whispered. 6 months later, the review hearing was a formality. Marcus's grades had improved dramatically. He'd gained 15 pounds and grown 2 inches. He was learning to work on motorcycles and had become something of a mascot for the Iron Brotherhood. But more importantly, he was happy, genuinely, deeply happy for the first time in his life. The adoption was finalized on a sunny Saturday in May, exactly 1 year after Tank had found Marcus behind that dumpster. The ceremony was held at Rosie's Diner, because that's where their family had really begun. Marcus Miguel Rodriguez, the judge announced. You are officially and legally the son of Thomas Rodriguez. Marcus had chosen to add Miguel as his middle name, to honor the brother he'd never met, but whose memory had brought them together. As Tank and Marcus cut the celebration cake, baked by Rosie, of course, surrounded by dozens of their brotherhood family, Marcus looked up at his dad. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For never giving up." Tank knelt down to Marcus's level, just like he had that first night. "Thank you for letting me be your dad. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Outside, the rumble of engines filled the air as the Brotherhood prepared to escort the new family home. But this time, Marcus wasn't afraid of the sound. This time, he knew what it meant. It meant family. It meant protection. It meant home. And as Tank lifted Marcus onto his bike for the ride home, Marcus wrapped his arms around his dad's waist and smiled. He'd finally found what he'd been looking for his whole life, someone who would never give up on him, no matter what. Behind them, 300 motorcycles roared to life, their engines singing a song of brotherhood, loyalty, and love that echoed across the valley like thunder. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.